Great. We're just rolling through the morning, which is fantastic because that means ultimately you guys might get out of here earlier. So here's this. Introducing Earl Capozzi again. So with Pratt & Whitney, going over some of the training requirements, what's expected, where, and when. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll eat up all that time. I'm going to talk to you guys have to go home. I'm just kidding. So I lead the training team, and it's championed by June from IHI. And June isn't with us today because he's in Japan. So part of our deployment strategy, we kind of tackled the hot potato that no one wants to touch, and that's training. We wanted to make sure we had support and for the adoption of AS13100. And it's evolving. You know, every class that you guys attend, we collect market feedback from the instructors, from you taking the class, and that does go back into the group, and we look at that. Just like we're going to collect feedback from today's session, it helps us better the RMs and the other standards. But I said this before, the folks that help develop the training are the same folks that are on the industry teams, whether it's 9145, 9100, or RM13004. So there's a lot of synergy there, and we really want to get the message out there. And with the end goal of simplifying and clarifying what the ask is. So this is a statement in AS13100, 7.2.4. I'm going to focus on two areas. One, what a quality leader is, because there's been some confusion. And the other one is the bottom statement about equivalent training. So I'm not going to get ahead of myself, which I will during the presentation, but not this second. So we'll focus on those two items. Everything in red here is mandatory. You have to take DPRV if you're in self-release. You have to do the quality requirements training, and then you have to do the foundation training. So we're going to spend a little time talking about each one of those. DPRV, it was the first training team that, you know, for us to tackle, right? DPRV, and it's been out since 2015. So I'm on the 9117 writing team, which is part of DPRV. So I support both teams. Since its deployment, it's in 43 countries, 10 languages, and 16,000 folks went through the training. We had a session in London, and we're revamping the training. We're refreshing it based on AS13100 and based on the fact that it's 7 years old already. So that's going to evolve. And we're also looking at research, but one thing at a time. You know, we're still going to continue to evolve the training. So this is what we have today for AS13100. We have an executive overview. We have quality requirements. We have the quality foundations. And then level 4. Level 4 is not mandatory, but the SAE is putting training together for us. And the ones with the little circles, they're either being updated or they're being created. The ones with the check in the box exist today. So you can get that training from the SAE. We work really close with Probitas and the SAE to develop this training. And once again, it uses the same folks that help write the standards. There's other training out there that would satisfy level 4. You don't have to use this training, but it really is linked to the RMs and to what we've created. So the first training is the executive overview. You know, we did a QR code there. If you want to click on it, you can click on it. If not, you can go to Google SAE AASQ and you can get to the training. So you don't really need the QR code. We wanted to put it in there, right? So essentially, it's free. It'll give you a general overview of the different training modules and what's in AS13100. So this is kind of the breakdown. It's a video series. You know, it talks about APQP, RM13145, FMEAs, 8D, and first articles. And it's the executive team that's speaking to you today who had put together those videos. So the requirements class, it's required by quality leaders. So the folks that are responsible for deploying AS13100 at your organization, they're the ones that should take the quality requirements class. We're going to talk a little more about that, but essentially, it really teaches you how all the standards link together and what the intent is of AS13100. So it really shouldn't just be a quality. It's not a quality initiative, right? Quality is part of the journey, but it really involves your whole organization. It, the whole evolution of the industry, we're going towards 9145, right? So it involves the whole team. It's not just the quality folks are in the corner doing their quality thing, and the procurement folks are pounding on them to ship the parts, right? It's a living and breathing process. So anyone accountable for that process should attend the quality requirements class. It could be the same person that takes the quality foundations class, which we're going to talk about. But this is a good class because it exposes you to Chapter A, Chapter B, and Chapter C. It's an online class. There's 10 modules. It's self-paced. Once you sign up for the class, it's available to you for 1 calendar year, and you can revisit it whenever you like. So please make sure you take the class. It is a requirement in the standard, and it really will help you in your journey. The Quality Foundations class, we put a lot of energy in this class, right? A lot of support from the SAE, from Provitas, from the writing team. There's a QR code again. Anyone who's a practitioner, the main focal for deploying AS13100 really needs to take this class. And it's hard for me to stand in front of you and tell you exactly who that is, but because you know the size of your organization, right? From the earlier in the presentation, we learned that there's smaller shops, maybe $500,000 in sales to billions in sales, right? But the expectation is at least one person from every site would take it. But if your site is across the street, that one person can probably satisfy both sites, right? So you need to manage that. It's something we are going to check to make sure you're sending folks to the quality foundations and the quality practitioner class. But use this tool. By no means are you going to come out of this class as an expert in 8D and FMEA. It's just going to show you how all the standards or RMs link together and all the shells link together and what the expectation is. One thing that's very important, I jokingly always say the foundation to the foundations course is the GE class. So we stole shamelessly from GE to create this class. So for this year, if you've attended the GE foundations class, you satisfy this requirement. This is the only class that's sanctioned by the SAE and the AASQ to satisfy this requirement. In the standard, there's that one little language there that says that the group would approve other trainers. With the deployment of this standard, it really doesn't make sense to do that. So the only class that we're sanctioning is a G class, and we're at the end of the year. So if you didn't take that class, you're probably likely not going to. But starting next year, the only sanctioned class is the SAE class for quality requirements, quality foundations. And you need that class to understand the ask. And the reason why we did that is, we did all this good stuff. We created the standard, we created the RMs, we created the LinkedIn groups to support the RMs. And this is just another support mechanism, right? To make sure everyone understands what the ask is. It's going to evolve, and we're going to continue to polish it up and make it better, but we think it's pretty good. So please make sure you identify who your quality leaders are, who your practitioners are, and who needs to attend it to be successful. And because it's key to the rollout. So I probably said this already, but it's a 3-day course. It's instructor-led, whether it's online or it's face-to-face. I prefer face-to-face. There was a class this week. Some of you probably attended. I'm sure some of you attended it this week. The dialogue that you can have face-to-face, you gain a lot of benefits because you can hear the challenges that some of your peers are having or success stories, right? It's really hard to do that online. So we really want you to understand the methodologies, the defect prevention. You've heard many times already, we can't live in that reactive environment with the big uptick in work we have. So we really need to be proactive. So we see this training as one of the medias to get more proactive and get you to understand what the ask is. And once again, it doesn't have to be or shouldn't be just a quality person, right? But it has to be scalable. You know the size of your organization. It would absolutely be a good thing to have your auditors go or engineering, but it depends on the size of your business. So once again, it's something we are going to look for to make sure that you're sending your folks. And the intent is, at least as a minimum, site quality leaders need to attend it. So it's hard for me to stand in front of you and tell you how big your site is. But if you have a site in California and you have a site in Maine, you probably need to send 2 different people, right? Because how can one person do that? I mean, you can argue if they have the same QMS, everything's the same. But our intent would be that you have a person from each site. Jim's going to talk to you. I went really fast. Any questions about training? We're going to open it up at the end for questions. I'm standing between you and lunch.
The Earl and Jim show.
The Earl and Jim show.
Anybody who's been on any of our online Pratt and Whitney talks, you know, we run over each other, practically married. Okay, so he's been talking about training that for you as a company kind of thing. One of the things that's come up, there's been a lot of communication back from our suppliers talking about the lead auditor training. So I lead the audits group, and we're talking about that checklist that we're talking about. We're talking about audit and making sure that that stuff's done, but we're also responsible for the section on auditor qualification that was added to 13,100. We thought we wrote it pretty clearly, but apparently I'm out of juice. All right, I'm up here again because we're talking about the same thing that I mentioned last time. The members of the AASQ are trying to get together to make sure that we all agree on, not interpretations, but when we wrote 13,100, we had this in mind. You are all reading it and not getting to that same point. How do we help you get from that point to explain what we really meant by whatever, and make sure that it's applied, you know, equally across the market kind of thing. So this is another one of those areas that lead auditor training, qualifications. We thought we were writing it a certain way, and then we realized, oh, hold on, we need to clarify this. Just like the audit thing, we can't change 13,100. We will eventually put out a Rev A of it, but that's going to be years from now. So the only way we can communicate these kind of things to you is either through an RM, and we're working on RM 13,005, which will include this, or, oh God, that slipped out of my head. Or to put it in like the checklist, like we're talking about that checklist where we're going to have some guidance. That guidance would be agreed upon. It won't come out of an RM, but it will be helpful to you when you go through that checklist as to what exactly you're looking for on that case. So that's the only 2 things we can do right now until we put out a new version of 13,100. We can't change the shall, but we can explain what the members meant by the shall, and that's what we're trying to do right now. That requires agreement among all 10 of us, so you can imagine that's going to take a bit. I just wanted, there was a couple of slides that we decided not to show because it was getting into too much of the details, but for those of you that aren't aware, 13,100, okay, I'm going to need a new mic. Am I speaking too loud? All right, that's probably true. So just in case you're aware, there's four audit types that are defined in 13,100. Their applicability is different. There's a table that will tell you exactly when they're applicable. What we're doing right now, or what we did was, as top of the 4 audit types that were described, we also set what we thought would be reasonable minimum background for auditors, both internal auditors and supplier auditors. These were coming out of, we've talked about it a couple of times, AS 13,005, AS 13,007. Those were going to be on internal audit and supplier management. So they basically came out of that. So we have 3 different aspects for auditors. One is initial training, that's why I'm up here, experience, and then a guide to how to get auditors to maintain their certification once they're qualified to start doing audits. A lot of companies don't have that kind of background. You know, the large companies like ours have always had a standard. New hires are going to go through this and this and this and this and this and this. And that's basically what we're saying as a minimum requirement. And it's pretty simple, those requirements. If you go table 5, 6, and 7, there's nothing really there, but we did miss a couple of things. So all I'm going to talk about is the things that are ongoing right now in the new revision of RM 13,005, which is on audit. We are correcting a number of punctuation issues, spelling. There was some stuff in there. It's like, oh, no, we missed that. We are going to address the definition. There are no definitions in 13,100 for lead auditor and internal auditor. And unfortunately, we called it internal auditor, but really it's any auditor whether they're conducting an internal audit, whether they're conducting a supplier audit. For some reason, we called it internal auditor. It probably should have just said auditor. So there's been some questions. Well, the lead auditor must have this level of training. The internal auditor must have that level of training. Yeah, but Jim, if a level 3 NDT guy is doing an NDT special process audit, isn't he the lead auditor? Well, yeah. Well, how's he going to benefit from a 4-day AS9100 lead auditor course, which is the requirement, basically? So, okay, hold on. We didn't think about a lead auditor doing a special process audit. So we're coming back and trying to do a little better job with the 4 different types of audits, lead auditors in those 4 different types of audits. What are the requirements for each type of that? It's getting close to modifying the shall, but really that's what we intended when we wrote it. So it's really just clarifying what the intent of that was. And yes, we're not going to require a 4-day AS9100 lead auditor course for the level 3 NDT auditor kind of thing. So there's going to be a different set of requirements. So we're looking at that right now. The next bullet is basically the same thing. You know, there's different discussions on what a lead auditor is, from the traditional lead auditor is running a large audit with multiple auditors and has to coordinate and issue a report, etc. To the lead auditor, really in every company, is that person that's responsible for their audit program, for making sure that the schedules are done, making sure that the quality of the audits being done by the auditors is what it needs to be. So we're working on that, trying to clarify exactly what lead auditors are to, again, address the training requirements for lead auditors, because that seems to be the place where most suppliers have come back and said, whoa, hold on. And we've heard that. Recurring, so one of the requirements in AS 13100 for all auditors is they conduct at least 1 audit per year and 6 within a 3-year period. Okay, so you can do 1, and then you got to do 4 in order to maintain your certification. That seems like a pretty easy basic number. If your auditor isn't doing an audit for 2 years, we really don't want that person stepping up again, kind of thing, because in 2 years our requirements changed and everybody else's requirements changed. So, but we're back to the special process person. He's doing a NADCAP-like audit once a year. How is he going to get to 6 in 3 years? So again, we have wording. It just needs to be agreed upon the members that in that case, that would be waived, kind of thing. The 6 for 3 years would be waived. So these are the little things that you've gotten back to us on, and we're trying to clarify and put it down. It doesn't change the shall. We can't touch 13,100, but at least hopefully we will all understand the same thing. The audit checklist will reflect these things, and we'll move forward from there. And then just, we realized that the sections on this on 13,100 was really AS9100 focused. So if you're 9120, or if you're only ISO, or if you're only I can't remember the other one, the IATF one, we want to just sort of expand the wording to make sure that it's understood that this doesn't only apply to AS9100 companies, which most of you are, so it's not a huge deal. But if you're only a NADCAP company, what would that look like, kind of thing? So we're working on wording of that. There's a couple of other things, but that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that when we come out with the product, with the checklist that I showed you before, it's really got everything it needs to do, including the auditor training portion. I think that's it for me. Yep, that'll be after lunch. So we got time. Yeah, how about some questions? Lunch isn't here yet, so Earl and I are going to dance for a while, and then if you can yell loud enough, we won't have to do the microphone thing.
I'm Tom Williamson with ATI. So you guys are working on these changes. We have less than 3 months to be compliant. What's the time frame for that release for us to be compliant?
It was in ballot already, and then we realized there was a couple of things. So we're close to being able to publish it. There's a couple extra things we want to throw in that we last minute suggestions. We were up to 8 out of 10 on the ballot that approved it, so we were moving forward with it. And then we were, oh, no, hold on, let's improve this and improve this. So my goal is October for the RM 13005, and it's just doing these things here. There will be a better RM 13005 later on, but we're hoping to get this one out, which again points you in the right direction. So there's another point, I don't know why it fell off. We are discussing, well, what do I do with my existing auditors, Jim? Can't I grandfather them in? We're discussing it, okay? I just want you to know we're discussing it, so you may not have to send all of your guys out to a 9100 course just because it says so in 13,100. So the members have to agree on sort of what the minimum acceptable requirements are for grandfathering in existing auditors, but we live in the real world, so we're working on explaining how that would work, okay? Good question. Come on, we're getting so many emails on this. Gotta have questions.
At what point should we expect to see the 13,100 audit checklist issued?
As soon as I can get the members to agree to about 22 different ways of auditing different questions, as soon as possible.
And then how do we push back so that we only do that checklist and not have a whole bunch of extra customer requirements added on to the end?
Well, okay. First of all, that checklist will replace the RM 13,009 checklist. So the audits team, although technically 13,005 has taken over responsibility for the RM 13,009 and the checklist and stuff that goes in. So the two of them will be the same. So you won't be any duplication between, oh, I got to do this 13,009 and now I got this new Jim's checklist. But as far as the individual OEM's additional requirements, at Pratt & Whitney, we can say that we're working on a similar checklist in the exact same format as the one we're working on for just our ASQR1 requirements. It'll be an addendum to that for a thing. We don't share that much information among ourselves, but it will be, the point is it being the same format. So we're coming in to do an audit. You complete my new checklist for 13,100. That'll be the same for all of the OEMs. Then you do my addendum. GE comes in 2 months later, you copy and paste your responses to the 13,100 questions into theirs, and then they'll do their S1000 additional addendum to the thing. You should only have to do the 13,100 once for each year. You're going to update it obviously on a regular basis, and there's a requirement to do a self-evaluation every year in 13,100. This would be the tool. But once you've done that, we are going to agree not to deviate from that checklist so that it minimizes your work when the second one comes in, when the third one comes in. I can't do anything about the addendum for ASQR1 or SAFE or any of those additional requirements, but we're keeping it as simple as possible is the promise. And in the same format, so everybody's using a similar format. That's my goal. We still have to work it out. Good now? You're still shaking your head, but that's as good as we can do. How about that? Again, copy paste into the checklist. That should be simple enough, yeah. And your annual audit, yeah. Sorry.
I got it. Hold on.
It was a multi-part question. That's all right.
Okay, so where I'm at, we have 34 people on site. I have one other person working for me in quality. And if you all want to take the better part of a week to come in and audit me as a special process supplier, I want to be able to consolidate that, sit you all in the conference room, give you all the same thing, and say, here you go. This is what I'm presenting you to look at. Then it consolidates this. And if you're all asking the same thing and you don't get your own version of it, you have to use the template that is provided for AS13100, and then start work on eliminating your special addendums to that.
Okay. And we all are trying to minimize those special addendums. But even if you are filling out that master's checklist, here's my reference in my internal procedure that satisfies that requirement. I still might want to see that requirement applied in real world to a Pratt & Whitney part number. He might want to see a GE part number, et cetera, et cetera. So that we're never going to get away from that. I'll go back to what I mentioned before, which is the annual audit report. So if you get really detailed that, yeah, GE already came in and did the 13,100 and there was 2 findings, here they are, here's the corrective actions. That again, the whole reason that exists is so that we can start using each other's audits without being able to give each other our audits. So that's as good as we came up with in the last 8 years, trying to figure out how can we not go audit suppliers as much. So you'll have a common checklist for 80% of what you've got to worry about that you can just copy and paste for all of us. The 20% isn't going to go away. We're going to try and get it down to 10%, but right now it's what it is. And then It's a question of that annual audit report, your own internal audits, and one of them will be your internal audit program. That's one of the internal audits. So, you provide that information to us. We can say, okay, what I thought was a high risk looks like everything's under control. We'll mail them an audit instead of going on site.
And then at what point should we expect this checklist to be on the site and accessible for us so we can have that?
As soon as I can.
Okay.
It's about 50% written right now. Then we have to get agreement among the members. It's, in some cases we're kind of clarifying the shall, but you know what I mean. It's sort of changing the shall to be what we intended and not necessarily what was written or what was read when it was written. So, shoot.
It's a combination question. So Nathan Fowler from MB Aerospace. Right now, I'm looking across multiple facilities. So we have obviously internal auditors or auditors. I like that clarification earlier. Thank you. We have auditors at each of the sites, but then there are a number of us that are going to be auditing from a group perspective. What would be your recommendations as far as the documentation of the qualifications, the experience, et cetera, for those of us that are doing it from a group level versus what you typically have in the sites?
What's your worry? Frequency or?
So all of the above, the documentation. So historically, I would have just listed it as a qualification, and then in the site made specific reference to a person. Now I'm thinking more. I would reference to maybe a group procedure that says, okay, here are qualified auditors at the site, as well as anyone who is on the group list,
Right,
and be more general. So thoughts, comments,
that's
snide remarks.
That's one way to do it, and that's how actually Pratt & Whitney Canada has been doing it for 20 years now. We all, us auditors, have to get on a certified auditor list that's then sent to Transport Canada after we complete all of these things, which are very similar to what we've got now.
Okay.
So yes, that's one way to do it. There's no real distinction between corporate and on-site audit. Again, we're working on the definition for lead auditor and whether that person is the corporate person responsible for the audit programs at each one of the sites, plus oversight by corporate. We'll hopefully come out with something that might be that way, so it would simplify the fact that every lead auditor out there needs the 4-day AS9100 course. It just doesn't make any sense. So, but yeah, I don't see any distinction between the two, unless maybe it's the frequency. The on-site auditors are probably doing enough to meet that 6 and 3 years. If the corporate ones aren't, well, we could get a waiver for that, or we could certainly understand that kind of thing.
Miguel Villarespe, Senior Aerospace San Diego. AS13100 requires all suppliers to be AS9100.
Not all. But
It does.
distributors are 9120, special processor, NatCap. There's manufacturers, yes, AS9100 is the basis.
We have about 200 suppliers, and about 20 of them are machine shops that are not AS9100. And we have a strong pushback from supply chains to keep them because it's hard to move away from them. These are machine shops legacy that have been producing parts for us for like 20 years.
What would their certification be, though? If it isn't 9100, is there something else? Are they ISO or are they
Nothing.
IATF?
They are
Nothing? All right,
machine shop that produce parts.
All right. Well, I'm going to answer the. You want to do the Pratt? The Pratt answer is easy.
It depends who your customer is. Don't tell me now. But in some scenarios, it's okay. In the Pratt scenario, it's okay. But I can't speak for GE Rolls and Pratt or the other companies. But if you're a Pratt supplier, come and talk to me, and we could talk through it.
Yeah, you're right. AS 13100 says everybody needs to be 9100. We've taken exception in ASQR 1 Rev 12 that says the same thing that it is today. So tier 1s have to be certified. Tier 2s only have to be compliant to 9100. We still want them doing the things that are in 9100, but they don't have to have a plaque on the wall. That's how we're addressing it, to ease into, yeah, eventually they're going to have to be 9100. The entire group knows that that's, we're trying to improve the quality across the entire industry, and that's going to be one of the things, is making sure as much as possible tier 2s, tier 3s, tier 4s even are, meeting the requirements for certification. So, but yeah, some of your other, like he says, some of your other customers, it may be a different story. refer to table, well, table 2 is the certification requirement, so it's not always 9100. You get down to a raw material manufacturer at level 3, that's not 9100 at all. Okay, it's just this AMS spec is our AMS specs. Distributors, pure distributors, which are only distributing industry standard parts, industry standard raw materials, and commercial off-the-shelf parts, it's 9120, unless there's something in one of the individual companies' documents that allows it to be something else. NADCAP for special process, labs are ILAC and other specifications. So see table 2 and start to apply that table 2 to your supply base. It'll probably show you where the gaps are. Okay.
Make sure to repeat that question, Jim.
Hmm?
Make sure to repeat that question.
Yeah, the question is, can I talk about the shop assist line on table 2? The shop assist line on table 2, if I remember rightly, says see your customer, right? Because obviously we couldn't figure out something. And I've had shop assist companies come and ask us questions. That's why there's nothing specific, okay?
For Pratt, it's an extension. For Pratt, can you hear me? For Pratt, it's an extension of the internal shop. So an internal business unit may have you do operation 1, 2, and 3. So that's a shop assist in my world, but I can't speak for GE.
Yeah, I can speak for Rolls-Royce. So like a shop assist is very similar. I have provided you a very specific router that you are going to run for me, and I'm going to cross-check your work.
Yeah.
So that's very much a shop assist.
That's a generic, yeah. You're not doing a process. You're just filling out a couple of steps in my own internal process. In our case, purchase orders are not issued by procurement for shop assist. They're issued by manufacturing, which is a clear distinction between it for Pratt Canada. So that's about as good as we could get. Uh-oh, Liz is here. That means I said something wrong.
So at this time, we're going to save some questions for the FAQ panel.
So you've heard several times today that the AS13100 was a best case effort to harmonize the requirements across the OEMs. And try as hard as we might, we were unable to harmonize all of the requirements. And thus there are some specific OEM requirements in addition or as an exception to the 13100. So for the next several minutes, we're going to go through those one by one with the OEMs and share with you what is unique for each of us. Okay. So for GE, there's really only a handful of things that are unique or differences or exceptions to the standard. We'll start with in the introductory section, we have a list of SPECs. And again, SPECs are just like the reference material. It is guidance material. It's what should be the quality system elements to support the engineering requirements. And these SPECs typically tend to align with the special processes. So if you got an EV weld application, you probably have an associated SPEC for us that talk about the quality system elements that should be in place to support those engineering requirements. When you go to section 4, we have a priority parts process within GE that is engineering driven, but we want the suppliers to understand and recognize what that means for them if engineering works with quality to engage a priority part review. And then we have affiliate requirements, which for us is GE entities that are not on our production certificate. So they're GE owned or GE involved, but they are a supplier in the regulatory sense. And so we have documents talking about their interaction with us as GE and as a supplier. And then when you get to section 8, that contains the most of the differences. One is an order of precedence. We clearly and emphatically state that the order of precedence is the drawing and associated specs, and the PO is second. That's contrary to what most people are saying. But again, that's not any different than it's ever been, because in the event of a conflict, the drawing takes precedence. Because we don't and we can't have sourcing changing requirements of an engineering requirement. The other elements are change in design, and most of these are electronic applications. GE has their own applications for dealing with a variety of quality system elements. One of those is the change in design process. Another is source problem reports. Purchase raw material has some unique requirements for GE in terms of whether you use an approved GE test lab or if you are not using a GE approved source. Fastener supplier requirements, we have some unique GE requirements for those that are dealing with fastener type situations in terms of inspection requirements. And then we get to APQP. And this question gets asked a lot. So, I heard somebody mention this. I think it was from one of the case studies. The question is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. How do you apply APQP? One part at a time, one supplier at a time. And so we're taking this like a journey. And the journey starts with a step. And no, we're not doing one supplier now and one supplier next year. But the point is, we're doing it in a staged, iterative process. We are approaching it from a risk base. And so beginning next year, when you get a new order, you'll have an engagement with GE, and they will share what the complexity risk is, and that will drive the number of PPAP elements to submit. And we also have some uniqueness with serialization as far as the serial number content of the characters. Hardware release, we have our own, we play on the DPRV, but then we have our own unique additional in terms of how we regiment and roll that process out. And then we have an electronic non-conforming material process. Section 9, one of those places in the standards that says the alternate inspection shall be as prescribed by the customer. So we make sure that this is one of the questions that was in the Slido as well. We at GE use every opportunity where it says in the standard, where required, as required, etc. We made sure that S1000 is prescriptive of how to deal with all of those in case of. And then when we get to product audits, obviously GE has some uniqueness there. And then in section 16 and 17, the FAI is going to be done per RS 1002, which is a little bit different than 9102. It plays in the framework, but we have additional data elements that we expect and require. Pete? Oh, sorry. Thank you. Section 16 FAI will be done per our requirements of S1002. PPAP, the submission, as I said, is based on manufacturing complexity and risk. And then the submission is done through our electronic application. That's the unique elements for GE. Thank you. Tracy.
Making fun of me. All right, so just a couple things to run through from the Rolls-Royce side. Sabre 4 has been rolled out, and we've tried to make it obvious in the Sabre 4 rollout training what things are similar and what things are specific to Rolls-Royce. To start off with, anything that was in Sabre 3 is clearly full compliance to all previous requirements. So that's where I want to start. There's nothing new or changing in that space. Some of the things I'd like to point out today, however, are that section 4.3, determining the scope of the quality management system. So we still have our new supplier approval process, and that compliance to 13,100 will be part of it. So the acceptable compliance is coming into this end of 2022. We do expect that self-assessment and a plan to close those gaps in the agreed timeframe. So that is something that we're still holding firm on. Section 6, actions to address opportunities. The additional thing that we're going to put in there is we do have a Rolls-Royce supplier enhanced cybersecurity standard that we continue to flow down. So that would be something that's supplemental in that area. In product safety, we are requiring that the supply chain every 4 years maintain that they're up to date with the product safety training. So product safety awareness briefing pack. We provide that as Rolls-Royce. And we do mandate that you flow that into your company on a 4-year rolling basis. And we usually update that training on the 4-year cadence as well. So that is a requirement that we will have also flown down, and that is clearly marked in Sabre 4 right now. The monitoring and measurement of manufacturing process. So same thing, achieve process minimum standards. So if you are a supplier to Rolls-Royce, we have the process minimum standards. So it's our benchmark tool system that we have that's available on the supplier portal. And this is really talking about what are the basics of whether it be anything from milling to lathe, special processes. We'll have those minimum standards that we have, and that's how we'll kind of grade you and help you along. We consider this to be a proactive tool to aid in right first time in our zero defects journey. So we will still be using those and expecting people to come with us on that journey. And the other one is continuous improvement. We will still be asking for and expect demonstrated commitments to zero defects, and that's by establishing the appropriate improvement plans. So you will be running those with your supply chain engagement team. That is still an expectation of which we have. Even with 13,100, we feel like it just buckets it and helps us all use common language, but those engagements are still expected. So those are the things that I kind of wanted to point out from the Rolls-Royce point of view today. Absolutely not. Jim.
You ramble on. Collaborating, yes. Setting a standard. All right. Unlike I think any of the other companies, one of our biggest challenges was that we share the ASQR1 document with our sister company, Collins. Collins is not an engine manufacturer, therefore 13,100 really doesn't apply to them. But they have purchase orders that have ASQR1 on it. So for us to make changes to ASQR1 that invoked 13,100, we had to get really funky with it. I don't even remember what this was. Okay, so that being said, so the ASQR1 Rev 12 was published at the beginning of July. It now is broken into 2 chapters. Chapter 1 is for Collins suppliers, which is basically pretty much exactly the way Rev 11 is today. Nothing changes for Collins suppliers. And then chapter 2 is Pratt & Whitney, calling out 13,100 and then adding in a bunch of stuff. This is talking about that chapter 2. So if you're a Collins supplier, you're going to basically be doing what you've been doing already today. If you're a Pratt supplier, and if you're both, that's a little bit of a problem. But if you're a Pratt supplier, you just go straight to chapter 2, and that this is what's in chapter 2 kind of thing. So this is one we put in there. Clarification of the AS 13100 and the RMs. Too many suppliers are reading our AS 13100 as supplier shall do this, CRM that. And if you read that just that way, we didn't intend for it, but if you read it that way, it seems like shall do this, see the RM for the details on how you're going to do that. And that's not what it is. So we've put in a simple paragraph that says, look, the RMs do not add any additional requirements to 13,100 and are optional, something like that. It was very clear. And it's the same type for every other of the members of the OEM, but we decided to put it in there. The rest of it is primarily keeping the status quo, okay? You can go to the RTX website. You can go to the what used to be UTC supplier website. Go to the quality documents there. Rev 12 is there. Right next to it is a presentation on the new paragraphs or the existing paragraphs in Rev 12. I invite you to go see that. And what you're going to see is that 95% of the clauses that are still in Chapter 2 of ASQR1 just are resetting either something that isn't in 13,100 that we had, or it's making an exception. Larry said exception to something that's in 13,100 to keep it the way that it is today. So, and we'll go through it. So 60 days to incorporate new requirements. That's been a standard for us. So if we notify you that we published a new ASQR1, you have 60 days to do it. A new ASQR 20.1, you've got 60 days. Deliverable software, we couldn't get away from ASQR 7.5, which is our software. You see that twice. There's deliverable one and then non-deliverable another. So we're still going to use our standard 9115. Our guys, well, 9115 I think is under review. First of all, it's being edited, and secondly, our guys weren't ready to just get rid of our standard. So, and you'll see that a couple times in here. An important one is the additions to the QMS certification table. So our AS 13100 table 2 is what are your certification requirements given the different type of supplier that you are. Basically, if you read that section in section 4 in ASQR1, it basically keeps all of the options you have today, even if some of those options have disappeared in 13,100, it keeps all of the options there. So it adds a couple to you, 3 or 4 of the different categories. For example, distributors in AS 13,100 is 9120, period. In ASQR1, it says it can be 9120 or it can be 9100, which is what it is today for us. So almost every one of those paragraphs in ASQR1 chapter 2 are basically just doing that, keeping it the way it is today. Until we have the time to do a Rev, well, what would be a Rev 14 with Collins and come up with maybe a singular document again that we didn't, or completely separate ourselves, in which case we can get a bit more specific. Jump to section 7, we defined significant out of tolerance. It's not something that's in 13,100 that's been in ours forever. What you need to do if there is a significant out of tolerance on your MTE equipment. Table 4, MSA acceptance limits. There's one line there that we've kept at, I think it's 20% instead of 10, 20, 30. It's just 20% across the board. DPRV program, like Larry. Yeah, so we have our own requirements for DPRV programs, and it begs the question, we should start taking a look at our programs because there's probably a lot of commonality there. Retention period, starting date, there's a definition in 13,100 that it's the end of, end of program, and we don't have that. So it's always the manufacturing date. Retention on radiographs is non-serialized parts. All retentions on radiographs or on quality records in 13,100 are 10 years for regular parts. We today have radiographs on serialized parts for 10 years, but on non-serialized parts, we don't want you to have to keep them for the extra 8 years, especially, it could be very expensive. Critical parts need to be treated to the requirements of ASQR 9.1 like they are today. A little list of our forms, and you can use that, well, you got to go through Larry's head, but the QR code there will take it to where this is actually located. There. Nope. Sorry? Well, you have to go through your head again. All right, section 8, continue. One of the contentious sections of AS 13,100 is the use of handheld spectrometry devices for the release of raw materials to the shop floor. We're agreeing with that, but we're not going to invoke it yet. We will only invoke it when it's required. So typically speaking, if there's a major escape to do with the material that was wrongly used to manufacture a part, that we put in place. Operator self-verification programs. So this is where operators are taking over the responsibilities of of quality to sign off on the final sign off on anything to do with the part. There's requirements there for getting that program approved by us. We have had forever, if there is an escape, and that's part of the root cause corrective action for escapes, that the next 3 manufacturing lots are over-inspected for whatever was found non-conforming. It's there today, continues to be there. We identified, this is sort of new, temporary key characteristics. We're doing it today, but we put it informally. So in the event of escape that on a part that doesn't have key characteristics, in order to control going forward, we may assign temporary key characteristics, and then you need to treat them just like you would any other key characteristics. Now we're into the APQP stuff. PPAP submission, we're defining our specific requirements for approval, deferral, elements, controls, the same as it is today in ASQR 9.2. So we've gotten rid of ASQR 9.2, which is the Pratt & Whitney, or the UTC RTX standard for PPAP. Basically called out 9145 and then added this stuff. So we've shut that down for Pratt & Whitney. It'll still be there for Collins, but we shut it down, and basically whatever was left in 9.2 is now in this chapter 2 of ASQR 01. So there is a couple of extra things in there to do with PPAP, but for you, status quo and what you're doing today in 9.2. Section 18, remind me, this is a supplier risk analysis. Yeah, supplier risk analysis. It's one section that just talks about, we're not set up to do that yet, so we're not going to invoke that yet. If you want to do it, it's a really good idea. In the ASQR 1, it says it's optional, or it's a best practice, please go ahead, but we're not going to write you up ever if you don't have this supplier risk analysis tool in the very specific format that it is there. And just way down in initial process capability studies, there's one small thing in there that we just carried over from ASQR 9.2, sorry. Okay, my friends at Safran.
Hello everyone. Catherine and I have prepared 2 slides to introduce what are our specific requirements from Safran compared to the AS13100. So on that slide, on the top of the slide, you can see the structure of the AS30100. Can you, sorry, do I restart? It's better. Okay, so on the top of the slide, you will recognize that the structure of the AS30100 in blue, and just below a line called more safe. Okay, and you can see on which chapter of the new standard we have some specific, I would say, Safran specific requirement. We perform the analyze through SAFE compared to AS13100 as you, based on what Jim explained through the reference manual 30009. And we have this following status. We have a common requirement in green area. We have in yellow specific Safran requirement. And we have also in blue RS 30100 supplemental requirement, I would say. Oh, it's better right now. And we have roughly 20 items which are complementary or new compared to SAFE. SAFE is our document, reference document for our supplier associated to our product. You have below 3 examples of what I will call new requirement. And through this analyze lead to the following status. If you are SAFE compliant, you are at least 84% IS 30100 compliant. And maybe more if you have already added in your quality management system some of the 20 items that we have detected as new or complementary to our requirement. This is the takeaway. It's very important because maybe you can be afraid of say, okay, this is a new standard where I am compared to the current standard, but right now it's roughly at least 84%. This is the takeaway of that slide.
Yes, just if I may add, in fact, when you see the 20 requirements, as Denis said, I think there are only 3 or 4 which are really more from AS 13000, compare SAFE and AS 13100. And the other 17 or 16, 17, or I'm not too sure about one of them, in fact, we call them, but maybe exactly the same way. So they are in SAFE, but maybe not within the exact same words. So that's why Denis said it's at least 84% because it may be more than that. So really, if you are a Safran supplier, don't be afraid because we already ask you, you manufacture APQP, PPAP, these have been already required for some years. So it's already in our requirements.
You will see that and you can see also that on chapter B, we don't asking for any more. Okay, so there is no more requirement on Safran side. On that slide, a few pictures just to share with you some example of the Safran specific requirement. First, corporate social responsibility. The supplier must demonstrate that they can implement a sustainable development approach. They shall prevent any risk related to the CSR, example, economic, legal, social, reputation, and so on. The provider commitment on that topics must be formalized through the signing of Safran Charter, which is in charge for the responsible purchasing. It's not easy it's not easy, sorry. The second example is about regulatory watchtower. Indeed, we ask the supplier shall have a regulatory watch process set up to monitor the health, safety, environmental regulation that apply. Okay. Third example, low carbon strategy. Safran is working on these topics and wants to reduce its green emission gas, gas emission, sorry, and we are working on it. So these topics is indeed associated with the purchase of goods and services, which are one significant contributor of our carbon footprint. Safran also associates its supply chain in this strategy, and we ask our supplier to provide and to communicate about their 5 years action plan to reduce your greenhouse gas emission, and also to provide us the carbon footprint of the product delivered to Safran. Next example, obsolescence. To prevent a disruption in our supply chain, we ask our supplier to define a documented process for managing obsolescence throughout the entire life cycle of the product. So this process must at least contain detection of any obsolescence at earliest opportunity, and of course, communication and action plan associated, last batch order or anything like that, okay? Last example, finally, scrap rate. We ask also our supplier to inform Safran within 15 days in any case of increase scrap rate, and mainly during manufacturing of critical parts or process impacting KPI of our product. This is some example of what we call a Safran specific requirement.
So as you can see, of course, at Safran, inside SAFE, we have quality requirement, but also other kind of requirements. And this is the reason why we are not totally aligned with all the things that are in AS13100. So we don't have, for example, even for logistic and so on, we have a whole bunch of requirements inside of SAFE document. Everything is in one document. So this is the reason why you have that. And the scrap rate is, if I may point it out, is very important to us. It's a feedback from difficulties we had those last few years.
Thank you for your attention.
Okay. All right. Before I turn this over to Barry for FAQs, I have some sermon notes to read to you. Little inside joke there. Somebody was saying earlier, they said you sounded like a preacher, and I actually am an ordained minister. So if that kind of resonates, then so be it. So, but I'm really not trying to preach to you today. But if it comes across that way, you'll have a little background. I wanted to clarify a couple of things. I've seen from the questions, and I've seen from some of the discussion today, that there might be a little bit of confusion. So I wanted to level set everybody, okay? First of all, there is a list of changes. I'm sorry, there is a list of changes. As the AS13100 writing team lead, I'm compiling, and I've compiled, and I think I have upwards of probably 30 recommendations for the next revision. So continue to feed those through to the ASQ team. And the best way to do that is to go to the ASQ website, and at the top right-hand corner, there is a Contact Us button. That will send emails directly to Rebecca Lemon, and she will funnel those to the writing team. So if you have recommendations on changes, that's the best way to handle that. I also wanted to address the plan is to start talking about a revision in January. And having said that, it's probably going to be a minimum 12, 18 months by the time it goes through writing and drafting and reviewing and editing and balloting. It's probably best case going to still be 18 months, but we're going to start the process early next year. So I know there was a question about that. The other thing I want to address is the reference material. The reference manuals cannot impose a requirement, and they cannot change a requirement. Now, there's been some discussion about using the REMs to clarify some things. The best way to clarify something is to submit a question or an interpretation using that same Contact Us link. There is a whole library of FAQs out on the website. I've been personally involved with all of them. I use some of the other subject matter experts to help answer those, but we have literally answered hundreds of questions. Some of the same ones you submitted today, and that's fine. We'll answer them again, but I want to educate each of you that there is a bank of questions out there with answers that is the ASQ's position. It's not a GE position, it's not a Pratt position, it's an industry position. Okay, so I wanted to clarify some of those things. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Barry.
Okay, good afternoon. Hope everybody enjoyed their lunch and has enjoyed the massive amount of information that's been flowed to you so far today. What we want to do now, and there's been a lot of questions asked already, and fortunately we have some that were anonymously supplied through the survey tool that we've been using. So we'll go through the top maybe 10 or 15 of those. But we want to take, actually, I think we've slotted about an hour for this. So this is your chance. You've got a panel of experts up here. So whatever questions you may have, we've got 2 microphones floating. I think we are recording this, so please wait till you get the microphone to ask your question. Probably going to be one of the key things, key sections that we have. I haven't finished yet. You can't ask your question. The court recognizes the lady at the front of the room. So you guys feel free if you do want to remain anonymous. There's no reason to, but if you do, you can also send it through the tool on your phone. Okay, so we'll go ahead, and if you would maybe direct it towards one of them if it is company specific, or you can throw it out there and you guys can fight over who gets to answer. Okay,
I'm going to throw it out there.
throw it out there.
How would you measure human factors?
So Catherine, I think it was mentioned, she is our human factors expert. So she'll get to field all of these.
In fact, when you deploy a human factor initiative, you need to go through different aspects. Of course, you have the training, maybe you have the number of feedbacks you have, the number of analysis you have made, you have the number of near misses, maybe. Near misses is very interesting. And the more of these you will have, the more will mean that you are deploying your initiative. So you can find a lot of them in the manual, in the next manual, which we did last week, we finalized. We have a whole bunch of examples like this one. These are some KPIs you can put in place in order to show that you are putting in place an initiative. Of course, if you haven't started, you won't be ready in 3 months. This is obvious because human factors initiative is really a long process. It's a shift. It's a really very big shift in your company because the way of handling things is different. So you need to put in place, as we have required, not required, it's not a shall, as we have explained, but there is the shall in the standard. You really need to go through those different steps, but the first steps, of course, is the policy in the company. If your top management is not convinced, it won't work. So you need to have the policy and leadership. Once this is stabilized, then you can start training and so on, and put in place, of course, the just and fair culture. But this needs to be monitored because it's for some people it's very difficult. You know, we have been trained at school and everywhere. If you don't do that, that's not good, and you have a bad mark. And if when we are auditing today, so, oh, you are not compliant, I'll give you a car, a corrective action request, you know. And in fact, this is the way we are built today. So we need to see that, okay, we can make mistakes sometimes, and we all do, and we need to understand why these mistakes have happened and what can we do to prevent them from happening. So this is the reason why I say it's a long process, but it needs to start. And so to see the progress, we need to follow some KPIs and maybe some assessment, maturity assessment, which could come, not totally ready, this one, but which could come in next month or next year. Was it okay for you? Is it?
If the expectation was more. So we have environmental health and safety having these KPIs already.
Yeah.
So survey results,
Yes.
there's ergonomic
So
assessments.
it's a
So
start.
we look at all of those things, those items. I just didn't know if there was something we may have missed.
Well, I think along the way you might improve. For example, how many? If tomorrow we issue that file for PFMEA, which is ready, or the one sorry, Barbara talked about. So this file will be released, I think, in November. So, for example, maybe you can measure how many FMEA I have used for with human factors, for example, and how many items do I have checked, or do I have put in place? I don't know the name. I'm lost with my sentence, but so I don't know what I have found. What was better than with no regular FMEA? Maybe you can measure that. I don't know. This is just a solution. How many AD I have been through more than just a human error or just training the guy. I have a lot of ADs like that. This is not enough. So how many of these have you made compared to last year, to last month, to last semester? This is the way you will be able to see if you are improving or not. This is some examples, but I'm sure you can find a lot of them.
Hello, Brendan Hill from BSI. It's just to add to the conversation. Everyone's aware of 45,001, the Health and Safety at Work standard, but there is another standard, psychosocial well-being at work, 45,003. So if you're wanting some good ideas on how to apply the psychosocial aspects, particularly post-COVID and all the changes in workplace practices, that's probably a good reference document for you to start with.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, another question?
So for your respective OEMs here, what's your timeline for making all of our submittal documents the same for all of the PPAPs and all of the things that we have to submit to you for all this? Because you just highlighted that all of your systems, you have to do this special one for GE, this special one for Safran, special one for Pratt. At what point have you set a timeline for when those systems are all going to be the same and homogenized so we can do one PPAP form and submit it?
That's a really good question. So I'm going to start by saying that there will not be a time frame for reconciling our electronic systems. We each have our own submission process for certain quality system elements. But I can tell you within APQP, there is already commonality with the forms and templates. All of the member companies in ASQ, and I can say this from a position of knowledge and strength because I'm on the 9145 writing team and the 9145 deployment team that's been working behind the scenes to commonize the various templates and forms that's used for the submission. And all the companies have nodded, and hopefully they're all in compliance to that. We're using the same PFMEA template, we're using the same control plan, we're using the same forms for all of the data elements. The submission process may vary OEM to OEM, but the forms and templates and the working of those various forms should be commonized.
can you put a piece of software in front of the submittal process for each OEM so we can submit and do one set of documentation so we get good at it. So we're doing one thing. And then if it needs to be disseminated, the information broken up in different ways for you, we submit it to a piece of software or website and it does that for you.
I can tell you as a writing team and as a strategy team, we hear you and we'll take that under advisement and discuss that further. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have another one over here.
Hello, Chuck Royce from United Precision Products. I just have a simple question. Will there be a FAQ for ASQR 12?
So myself and Jim have been holding sessions with suppliers. If you missed them, we have 2 sessions scheduled for October 13th. You can send me an email and I can invite you to that session. And we can be very specific, right? Because it's in the Pratt environment. Hopefully that.
Board those, and are they rewatchable?
Yes, so for Pratt South is Connecticut. Pratt North is Canada. I created a tab on the supplier portal under applications. It says AS13100. So any presentation that we had done is posted there. So you can go grab the presentation. So you might answer your own question. But we do have makeup sessions October 13th for session 4. And then we're also going to do a session 5 in November.
I will add that that presentation is loaded on rtx.com/supplier.
It's easier. Canadian law,
That's it.
it's harder to post it in the Canadian system because it has to be translated in French. So it's easy to get in the South, a little harder in the North. But we did post one of the sessions on the RTX webpage also. Yeah. Oh, and one thing we were talking amongst ourselves, one of the rules, there's antitrust rules, right? I mean, there are rules on what we can engage with. So we can't promote a tool like a DT tool. We're really not, we can't talk about the DT tools we use. Some of us know what others use, but we really can't promote one tool. So it would violate the antitrust rules.
Okay, I don't see any hands. So while somebody's deciding to not be shy, let me read one of the, actually, this is the top question that was posted into the survey or had the most likes. COVID left a large mark, large being in all caps. COVID left a large mark on the supply chain in the form of a lack of personnel resources. Is there any possibility for postponing the comply by date for 1 year?
Okay.
Go ahead, Larry.
Would you,
No, don't say okay. You said
would you like the short answer or a long answer?
long.
How many letters?
The short answer is no, we are not postponing. But let me say this, and I'm sure others are going to want to add to this because we've had these discussions behind the scenes when we saw this question pop up with 100 votes. I'm embellishing, but it had a lot of votes. So I understand and appreciate, I can actually empathize with you. The requirement's been out there for 18 months. We as an industry, we as a group feel it's more than reasonable that it could be dealt with in that time frame. But we also realize there may be some gaps. So the position that we're taking, at least GE, and I believe I can speak for others as well, is this would be a favorable position, is do the gap assessment, take the training, do the gap assessment, identify what gaps you have and when you expect to close those gaps, and then have a meaningful discussion with your customer. And I don't know any customer that wouldn't have that discussion and come to some sort of agreement. Now that gap can't be, we'll say, it can't be a year. So something reasonable and meaningful, but do the work. Take the steps. It's just not acceptable to say, I need an extension. It's not going to fly. Do the work, see where you are, identify what the gaps are, see what effort it takes to close that gap, and then have a discussion. And I think that you'll hopefully find a successful path to that. Anything to add?
Go ahead. Thank you. As I said, for Safran, if you have done the work for SAFE, you are in good shape. So just finish the work. You just have at 15% of work to do. So we won't wait 1 more year, because when we issued SAFE, of course, I was building SAFE at the same time. So it was easier, of course, as the AS13100. So that's why it's so close. I tried to reduce the gaps as much as I could. So, of course, the standard was issued in 2020, SAFE standard. So you had time to prepare the work. And so, as Larry said, just do your gap analysis and have your action plan ready, and then we will discuss.
Just what I attempted to show you when I presented too was a lot of the AS13 series of documents just rolled into one document. So there is some new items, but there's not really a lot, right? It really consolidated everything and gave you the RMs to help you if there were gaps. So it really is a palatable ask to do it by the end of the year.
Go ahead.
So I appreciate what you're saying about the spec's been out there for 18 months and we've had time to go do it. A lot of us have done the gap assessment and we understand where our gaps are. But you're implying that all the gaps are on our side. And the fact is that there are requirements in the spec that we just cannot comply with or that need to be changed. And according to Larry, that's not going to happen for 12 to 18 months. So how do you close that gap? And how do we start that by, on January 1st, if we don't even have a quote good spec to, make it happen?
So I'll speak for Pratt. Where we identified gaps, we closed it in ASQR01, right? Like one of the gaps we had is throughout our system, you can be 9120 for distributors or 9100. So we carry that forward. So wherever we found a gap when we did our self-assessment, that's where we made an adjustment. But I can't, speak for everybody else.
So again, I'm gonna make the same statement. So it is OEM to OEM specific, because each OEM has their unique way of dealing with some of the problem areas. So if GE has not taken care of that for your organization, then we need to have that discussion. If you've had that discussion with GE and you're getting no results, let myself or Barbara know, and we'll be glad to engage. And I make the same offer for the other OEM companies, that if you've got a specific issue, Pratt sounds like they've closed some of the known gaps, you're going to have to educate me on what those gaps are, because I don't know anything in the standard that you can't meet. Now, I say that to say, yeah, it may take more resources, it may take more effort than you want, but I don't know of any requirement in the standard that you can't meet. So we'll have to have a discussion offline. Thank you.
Okay. Any more for now? Okay. Next one from the survey. How will AS13100 impact Tier 2 or Tier 3 suppliers that do not manufacture but provide service or finishing processes to parts being produced?
Well, I guess I would start by saying, let's look at what's applicable to those suppliers, because not all sub-tier suppliers are providing the same level of service or the same level of complexity or the same type of process elements. Special processes, by definition in the table, is a type 5, which is I think, it might be type 4. Type 4, special process, requires 8.5.6, I believe. It invokes PPAP. So special processes don't get a pass when it comes to APQP. They may not have all of the elements and all the goodness, but I'm hard pressed to know of a special process that couldn't benefit from doing a PFMEA, identify what your failure modes are, applying control plans to those failure modes, and making sure that we are defect free moving forward. So that's just one example. I don't know if others have other examples or not. But
I think the short answer is also the table tries to capture all suppliers that would be affected by this. So every supplier is going to fall somewhere within the table. And then the applicability flows from there. Okay. Another question?
Just one qualifier there. So tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 is obviously incumbent upon tier 1 flowing down the applicable elements and the applicable requirements. So if I'm a tier 4 supplier, I'm sitting on an island unless I get clear instructions on what to do and what kind of data you want submitted. So those rules of engagement have to be clearly defined by the tier 1.
Okay.
What is the similar kind of the response when it comes to shop assist? I don't know who's spit it out. You did. Yeah. Jim, he's coaching from the behind here.
So the shop assist question is back on the table?
Well, it's Jim's fault.
Taking that. Sure, the production shop assist, I think it's by definition, I'm not going to quote this because I'll get it wrong, but I'll ad lib. Production shop organization is on contract by a prime to do a certain operation or a certain process. And thus the recipe has to be flowed down from the prime to accomplish that production shop assist. It might be to do a full FAI, it might be to do a limited or a full PPAP, but the prime is responsible and obligated to flow down the requirements, and that's what's stated in the table and in the text, is that production shop organizations will be as directed by their customer. Did that take care of that, Jim?
For now. Okay. All right, the next one. What will happen with parts that are now running, now being manufactured? Do we need to make them comply with AS13100, or will, I think there's a word, will this be only for new parts and parts affected by EC, engineering change?
Okay, so we kind of anticipated that question, and I've been talking to some of you. So when it comes to APQP, PPAP, it's all about change, right? So what I'm trying to explain in my presentation is what type of change do we have? Do we have a new part introduction? Do we have a change on the port? Are we transferred from one factory to another, or change the process? And those type of changes is when we invoke APQ PPAP, right? It's forward thinking. It's not going back into what you did in the past. It's what you're going to do from now on, right? Even if it's a legacy part that it was designed some years ago, but if you're going to transfer that from one source to another one, you might invoke some of the APQ PPAP elements because it's a level of risk in there, right? Don't know if you want to add anything else or answer the question differently.
Okay. Ooh.
I like it when it's right.
Let the microphone get to you, please.
They're recording it.
I made that question because let's say that there is a minor change on the drawing or something, and not all the elements are being affected. So we don't have a control plan. We don't have a PFMA for that part. So that does mean that we need to create those to that part to be complying with the PPAP and submit those elements, even that we didn't have in the past. That's
right. So generically, yes. So for example, you're changing from one process that you're going to affect. It depends on the type of process, right? And it's like a table in there, right? Where you say that the part can affect the quality of the outcome, you need to look at the specifics on APQ PPAP in terms of production, what is applicable to that. And most likely it's about PFMEA, making sure that what you move on this particular change doesn't affect the fit for non-function and so on. So it requires aspects of APQ PPAP. It doesn't require to redesign the whole thing because you already have design, but if you are changing part of the process, you're going to evaluate that change.
Okay.
And well, this the other thing you're saying here is it can vary from prime to prime, right, as well. That's what Roy is saying. You apply APQP in those kind of changes. We will tell you when we want to know about these changes through PPAP applicability metrics. But GE, for example, I believe they have a risk approach on where you want to invoke the PPAP, right?
Okay, from the Collins table.
One clarification I want to ask about. So we're saying we want to apply AS13100 for NPI, changed product, transferred product. No, Larry.
Come up here if you want to. Come hit them.
I only stopped you because I wanted to make sure we're clear. When we talk about forward-looking, we're talking about primarily the APQP process because that's the question that comes up most often. So if you get a contract in January 2nd, 2023, you're expected to apply APQP per AS 13100. All of the elements of 13100 are effective January 1st. I just want to make sure that's clear. And it's so the forward-looking piece is typically and narrowly talking about the APQP and what do I do with legacy hardware.
That was one of the clarifications I want to make with the APQP. So we only need to do it when it's contractually invoked and agreed to.
Sounds like you're using some legalese language on me.
Wait, it's not universally done. You guys have to call it out as a requirement and we have to agree to it. That's our understanding, at least mine. Is that correct or not?
Well, let me talk for Rolls-Royce, right? So Rolls-Royce in Sabre 4 that has been in place for a number of years, well, months, it says very clearly, say APQP PAP is applicable, right? PPAP, that's knowing about what you have done. We have an applicability matrix where we refer that in the supplier portal, say on these engines, in these cases, we want to have PPAP, but it's expected that you do APQP PAP. You have a contract that says you need to apply Sabre 4.
So it's by contract.
It says, yeah, it says you do APQP PAP unless we tell you the opposite. Is what it says.
I know, Larry, with my GE PQE, he actually told me we're not going to invoke PPAP that often because we can't even handle the processing of it ourselves.
Okay, let me try to answer this. We go a lot like when is applicable, when is not applicable, right? If we go to the 27 elements of APQP PAP, you can hear me? Yeah. Let's have this conversation on what do we don't think it should be a good thing to do, right? Because if you look at the elements, say, do we need a fair? Yeah, we're going to do a fair, right? Or we're not going to do a fair. Do we need a bill of materials? Yeah, we need a bill of materials. We need inspection plans? We need inspection plan. So we need to demystify this big thing about APQP PAP because we are doing, and we've been doing that for a long, long time. And if we are not doing that, it's a different conversation, right? But it's a lot of the elements that we're already doing, right? And when you go to your organization, because most of you are from quality, and you talk to your general manager, say, oh, PQP PAP is really difficult. You say, well, we've been doing a lot of the elements already. And I don't think many of us can argue that having a bill of material is a good thing to have, right? It's the first requirement. Or the last requirement is have a fair is a good thing to have.
I think we all agree it's a good thing to do, right? We get that. Especially smaller organizations, though, there's cost and people involved. So I think people want to see it on contract and be able to plan and price for it, which is fine. But just to say you're going to go do this, there has to be an agreement.
So let's look at it this way. We showed a slide earlier today that said all of the 10 voting members of ASQ have flowed down 13100 requirements. So I have to believe that that means that your contracts have been updated to invoke 13100. If you have a contract that's existing, then obviously it would not because it preceded the flow down. So I don't know how much clearer to make that. The flow down has happened, and the contracts from that moment that you received, at least for GE, I heard Pratt say you got 60 days. For GE, as specs are applicable upon publication. I don't know what the other OEMs have for their flow down, but that's the running rules I'm aware of.
There one more, I think, right here.
Yeah, can you wait for the mic, please? You got it answered? Okay. Thank you.
Any others right now? So this is a fitting question for that conversation. What happens if we are not 100% compliant by December 31st? I think that's been addressed. Earl did fairly well, and I think that's.
Yeah, I think that plays in the previous question about the gap, having a meaningful conversation, and then making an action plan and finishing the course.
Okay, how do you consider this a contractual obligation? Many companies have not accepted it, so how are we obligated?
Again, I'll start. I can only speak for GE. I know that again, our RS spec invoked 13100. We published it in April 1st of 2021 and said no later than January 1st will you comply. That's on every PO, and that's been on every PO since 2021. And that's the expectation. We do have a right of negotiation, if you will, that our terms and conditions gives the supplier X amount of time to submit concerns and issues to their sourcing counterparts. If you've done that, then they're working through that process. If you have not, then you have accepted it when it was flowed down. Earl, anything to add?
So for Pratt, we do have a risk-based approach for PPAP and APQP. So we have a spec that's called out PWQA 6100. If that's on your purchase order, you have to comply to Chapter B. We would like you to do it on everything, but we don't have the capacity to. So you're going to see more. Any new engine program has PPAP on it. Legacy stuff we kind of stayed away from unless it's a big problem part. And you'll see that PWQA 6100 called out. So that's why I like to say, and what I tried to show you, you're probably in good shape because you probably had that spec called out. You were doing PPAP yesterday. You're going to have to do PPAP tomorrow. So for us overnight, you're not going to have this new PPAP requirement. It's been there if it applies.
And also maybe it's a very good information for next PO, I would say, because really tomorrow we really want to be better and to drive to zero defect. We still request in PO good parts on delay, of course, at the right cost. So, and we think that this will help everyone answering to that demand. So this is something very important. So of course, it will be something that we will look for next PO.
Of course it's important.
Of course it is.
Go ahead, we can restate.
Well, Larry, I heard what you said about every PO has had it on it, that we're going to have this requirement come January 1. And I've been doing a lot of, and I will admit, I've only been at my company for just over a year. And there are several sites that I go to and audit. So there are different purchase orders, different customers, a lot of different stuff. So I have somewhat of a limited scope of experience within my company at this point, but I have done a lot of contract review recently in all of the internal audits that I've been doing. And I haven't, and I dig, because I want to make sure that we are as compliant as possible. I haven't seen that on our purchase orders yet.
Well, first thing is to know the formula. So S1000 is invoked from C64, Article 13, and S1000 invokes AS13100.
Okay, so, and I'm just stating this, I guess, not just for myself, for the whole room as well, maybe, just as a reminder. So we're only talking engine components, right?
For us, it's GE Aviation engines, different than GE Aviation systems.
Okay, all right. And maybe the rest of the room, already had a clear understanding of that, but I was just restating.
Again, I want to make a point, not to call out this lady, but there are no unimportant questions, because if you have a question, somebody else in the room has the same question. I guarantee you. So please, this is your opportunity. Ask questions. There's no dumb questions. There's no unimportant questions. They're all important. And we all are on this journey together. We haven't mentioned this much today, but we really do want to partner with the supply base to make sure we're ready. We really do. It may not feel like that sometimes, but that's our objective, I know, at GE. And hopefully that I can speak for the entire industry. We really do want to partner.
Okay, one more.
So I think part of the issue here is the way you guys flowed this down is through your governing specs like S1000. In my company, I was one of the only persons to receive that update from you, and I'm in quality. It didn't come through contracts where they could investigate what was involved and what was needed. So I'm sitting on a very small stool trying to get people's attention that this has flowed down. And it probably took 6 months to get some active engagement. I don't think this was done correctly. And I think it's a problem for a lot of people.
I couldn't resist. Don't tell HS&E I didn't use the stairs. Well, I appreciate that, because in quality, I think most of us up here, also, I get contracts from Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Airbus, whoever it is, right? I get those contracts, and it is very important for the contract review process. And someone mentioned it earlier in one of the supply chain things. It's a team sport. So while I do appreciate that you probably got the update to Sabre, someone in your organization that received a PO has that on there. And what are they doing? How are you guys as a company engaging together for that contract team to understand what's the requirement for your quality group? What's the requirement for your shipping group? What's the requirement for if you have engineering, non-conformance? Like, there are lots of different things in a contract. And what I have found through my career, and I'll admit, even in Rolls-Royce sometimes, people look at contracts, they're like, when do I have to deliver my part? And how much money am I getting for it? And some teams end right there. That's the end. Everyone in this room cannot be part of that. You can't be the end. You have to have that team engagement to get your contract flow across. It has to be that way. Otherwise, you're going to miss things. And it might be the 13,100 flow down, or it might be something else, whether it's a DFAR or something of that nature. You guys have got to work together. So while I do get it, I do, it's not, to me, it's lack of deploying just the basics of a management system and contract review in 9100 or ISO 9001. They're all there. I think I can only speak for Rolls-Royce. So in Rolls-Royce, in the contract, it talks about we have Sabre. So it's clearly called out Sabre amongst all the DFARs for, I'm in the defense industry. So like we'll spit all those out as well and anything else that's fun. But that is where you as the responsible person, just like I have responsible people that deal with my customers, at that moment that you receive a notification from supplier. So I'm a supplier to Pratt Whitney, okay? For the lift system. I have gotten all of their emails, and I know that my program quality rep for the Joint Strike Fighter has gotten all those emails, and we have to go out and have that conversation. If your leadership is ignoring you, that's another conversation, but it's on our shoulders to make sure people understand when things change. It's no different than like a a mill standard spec. If I were to go to a heat treat house and a mill standard spec changed, do you think that them not getting that in their contract is an excuse for them not to do the updated mill standard? No, it is not an excuse. So that's my RR position.
All right, yeah, I'd like to add this just because it just a statement of facts. So for GE, yeah, it's not on the face of the PO. Anybody that does work for GE knows that we flow down S1000 through C64. GE has communicated that numerous times, not just to the quality department. We send out quarterly newsletters. We have a supplier broadcast call every quarter, and we've consistently been highlighting AS13100 even before it was published. And that newsletter and that broadcast call invitation doesn't just go to the quality manager. It goes to 13,000 plus employees across our supply base. And we have about 900 suppliers. So you can do the math. There's a lot of people that get that notification. So you can plead ignorance, but sorry.
Jim's suggesting next year. We've done the same thing. I mean, before this was even a spec, we have supplier forums, usually by engine program. So when the suppliers go to the Connecticut Convention Center, our procurement team and our boss at the time, Dan Eigenbrod, would go out and communicate, hey, this is coming your way. And then Jim and I would send out what we call an eagle eye, telling you this is coming your way. So this has been working for a long time. And I can't overemphasize, a lot of it's been there. So if you look at ASQR Rev 9, we're at Rev 12 now. We started calling out 8D. We called out MSA. We called out process control. So this has been there for a long time. And maybe it slipped through the cracks, but it shouldn't have. And now it's just in one spot, right? What?
Contractually, the flow down, I wanted to make sure that we got in on this, but contractually today, ASQR1 is a requirement on all of our purchase orders. ASQR Rev 11, which is in vogue today, has a section in it that you all agree to that says you'll be compliant with the latest and greatest versions of ASQRs, UTCQRs, and a bunch of other documents. And if it goes on to say you have 60 days from the publication or effective date of that document to incorporate it. So that's how that's how it becomes contractual. We will extend that to January 1st, like we did with Rev 12. It actually says in ASQR1, unless otherwise specified. So we're specifying January 1st as the effective date, but otherwise it's 60 days, and that's already a contractual requirement. So that's how we do it.
All right, Barry, can you move this back to a helpful question?
That was a very helpful question.
Because I feel the need to apologize just because maybe my tone, but hopefully you can appreciate the passion that I have for this topic. And I really want us all to be successful. And we over communicate, and still there's a pocket that either didn't get it or didn't understand it. So we've just got to continue to try to plow.
Okay. How are we on time, by the way? Is anybody watching our 1 hour, 10 minutes left? Okay.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I'm going to dredge back up APQP again real quick, but just a point of clarification for me. So I do understand that I clearly understand when APQP is required, but is there a difference as to when PPAP is going to be required? You know, I know we'll do APQP for everything, but I know some of the communications we had, we may not have PPAP portion of that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked the question because sometimes we use the term APQP, PPAP. So every time we say APQP and PPAP, and it's not the same, right?
Right.
So for Rolls-Royce, we say you need to do APQP, but PPAP, which is the evidence that you have done it, we request it in specific cases, right? Okay. So in some cases, say everyone applies APQP, but PPAP, we have a matrix to say, in those cases, I want to know about it through PPAP. I don't know how the other engine manufacturer does it. Is it in a similar way or?
Yeah, so at Safran, we have started with PPAP long time ago. Yes, so we started with PPAP because it was, well, with the tools we've had, Also, with the AS 13,000 something, we had the first tools to build that PPAP. So PPAP has been called for years. I think we started, I don't know, 2017 or something like that, really to call it on a PO. APQP went afterwards, and APQP, the APQP part of the design is more for today for build to spec, what we call build to spec type 2A and B, no, B, 2B, so 2A suppliers. This is the part which is new. So PPAP for us, it's something very common. And APQP is something like 2 years old for us.
So for GE, I think I've communicated this previously, but in case it wasn't clear, January 1st, if you get a new order from GE for a new part for you, it might not be a new part for us, but it might be a new part for you because it's a source change. If it's a new part for your organization, we expect you to apply APQP per AS 13,100. We expect you to submit PPAP elements based on the manufacturing risk and complexity. And that will be communicated to you. And there's a table that defines very high, high, medium, and low risk, and the associated PPAP deliverables for that risk element.
I won't repeat myself, but I already said for Pratt, we have a risk-based process when it applies, and it very likely applies to any new engine program.
Okay, I think this is a good question and it hasn't been really broached yet. Many of the requirements of AS and AS 13100 require customer approval rather than notification. How will these approvals be managed when we work with many member companies?
Well, I'll start. As I said, AS 13100, I looked for all of the sections that say when required, as defined, and all of those have been articulated and stated in S1000 what the path of resolution is for each one of those situations and elements.
So I think it's incumbent on the supplier, if there is an approval from your customer required, you have to keep that record. And I think that's kind of what that's asking. How's it going to be managed? It's prescriptive, and when you're going to need a customer approval, it's up to you to be able to produce that if you're asked. Okay.
There it goes. Okay.
Were you the one that asked the question?
Yeah, I did. Yes, I did. So actually where my question was going is some of the requirements say we have to get customer approval for certain things. We may work with GE or Rolls or Pratt. How do we manage it when we have to get all three of your approvals, yet one may say, yeah, I approve, one says, no, I disagree. Like, how do we deal with that?
You probably can't sell one parts to the one that says he disagrees. You're
No,
going to have to manage that customer relationship one at a time. And if they're all requiring approval, you're going to have to capture that approval, win that approval.
Well, not part specific, but process related. There are certain requirements that say your processes have to be approved. Okay. So it's not necessarily part by part unique.
I guess like anything, you're going to have to negotiate and figure out what's not approved, what's the complaint, what's the rub, how do you fix it, how do you come to a middle ground that's acceptable. And
can we talk through a practical example? Do you have one?
Yeah, so there was a requirement, I don't remember the exact number, but it talked about significant changes to your QMS shall be approved. And it's one of the earlier 4-point-something requirements. So for example, in that case, if I have a major change to my QMS and it says that I need to get approval, how would I get that if I'm working with 3 member companies?
I would expect you to communicate that through your customer contacts, and they would either send you an acknowledgement or some other form of approval. If you send it to me, I would say, acknowledge, thank you.
And acknowledges approval?
For me, it is.
Okay.
So for Pratt, we took exception to that in ASQL1.
Okay.
When you have a
and by the way, that's on the list to change to notified. It's not changed. So you got to get approval, or at least some confirmation from the customer that they received it.
I'll let you into the inner circle. We probably combined 2 paragraphs, and that really probably shouldn't have happened. But live and learn. Go ahead.
So, thank you. So we have been working with through DBIs with software engines. So when this is starting January of 2023, are we going to stop doing DBIs and start with the PPAPs, or how is that going to be combined? Or
Safran has been working on in your PO. You should have already PPAP because we invoked PPAP, as I said, I think in 2017 or 2018. We have changed all of our POs. So you should be already working with PPAP, not with DVI anymore. And also, I think you are a build to spec supplier, so APQP is required for you. So because we have a lot of issues, I mean, we really want to focus on build to spec suppliers and APQP to have robust product. So I'm sure you will be maybe the first suppliers we will come and see.
no, actually we own the design, so we are not
Yes,
built.
so you are a build to spec supplier. So you want,
okay.
Yes. So APQP is PPAP, of course, but APQP, you need to do the first part. The first part is very important to us.
Let me check with our time monitor, Miss Becky. So we
Sorry.
do leave, okay, 5 minutes. The gentleman from Collins.
Sorry.
Not sorry, Collins.
I'm trying to understand what's going on with the AS 13,001 through 6 documents. From what we understand, we've been told they've been superseded in AS 13,100, but they're still active. And connected to that, we have been flowing those down to our suppliers. And I even recently got agreement from GE to use AS 13,002 and the tables in them. And now the tables are gone and we don't know what to do.
Tables on 3 and 4.
So that's a multi-part question. So let's kind of break it down this way. First of all, the original intent was to supersede and remove the existing 13,000 series documents minus 13,001. And that a request was made by a member company to keep those as active documents, but they will not be changed. They're frozen. They're frozen as is, and will continue to be used for a period of time, not to exceed, I don't remember what we said, was it a year or?
Year and a half, yeah.
So something. So at some point they are going to go away. They are frozen. They are not going to change, but they can still be used in the interim. And then at some point, all of the shalls from the 13,000 series documents have been added into 13,100. So then all that was left was the guidance material for those documents post. So hopefully that helps.
So what about the issues with AS 13,002?
Those are being addressed by the by the RM team. That is a known issue, and those are being reconciled.
So one of the concerns was AS 13,100 in a couple places points to a CPK or PPK 133, and that conflicts with the tables in AS 13,002, and there doesn't seem to be a consideration for minor or major characteristics. And a minor, you can be as low as 1.0.
That
according
is
to the
one of the
table.
known issues. And again, I can only say we're working with the subject matter experts on the 13,002, RM 13,002, and trying to get that reconciled.
Okay, 2-minute warning. So one more question, which I think all of you would like the answer to. will the slides presented be made available to the attendees? And the answer is yes. And they will be posted on the AESQ website where all the other information is posted. So, okay. That was fun. Yeah. I like to watch Larry squirm a little bit. So you can tell AS13100 is the Bible for him. So he has the ordination, and then he's here doing this. So thank you very, very much. And I will say that Larry has put in endless hours updating and answering the FAQs. He's been the primary source or has pulled people together to get answers for that. So keep loading those. We review those, we look at those, do our best to get those responded to. So keep loading your answers in there. So I think that's about it. So thank you guys. We put them under a little bit of pressure. Good enough. Thank you.